Welcome back, Vetted VA members. We get together here every Tuesday for Taco Tuesday, but we have to wait until after the show for that. And Vetted VA Live, where we get together with a group of vetted pros on the real estate and mortgage side and go through some of the top questions that we are seeing in the Vetted VA Facebook group, the top questions that we're getting just in questions with consumers, buyers, borrowers on a daily basis. So if you're watching in the Vetted VA Facebook group, I'm glad to have you here. If you're watching on the Vetted VA YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel, I don't know if any of our guests are streaming to their YouTube channels tonight, but if you're watching anywhere else and you're not aware of the Vetted VA Facebook group, go out, search Vetted VA. It is a great resource where literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, we have moderators, vetted pros, just like the four of us here tonight, that can answer any question you have related to mortgage and housing and using your VA financing. So tonight, we are going, it's going to be a fun conversation because we're going through the top 10 mortgage related VA questions that we have coming up right now. The ones that are sort of evergreen are always top 10. And then the ones that each of us are hearing a lot in today's market. So before we jump into that, I'll go around the horn here and just quickly introduce our guests. Jason Rivera is here in San Diego as a realtor. Tina Brumond is a fellow loan officer up in the Ventura area. So we've got the coastal Southern California market completely covered. And then Randy Tikel is joining us from Salina, Texas, and he has that part of the country covered. So even if you are in the northern latitudes of the United States, we still can answer your questions. We have familiarity with that, and the guidelines pretty much extend throughout the country. So like I said, we're going to go through the top 10 questions that we're getting and seeing right now. But in addition to just going through the topic and discussing it with everyone, our number one purpose here is to answer your questions. So you have anything mortgage or real estate related about using your VA financing, throw the question there up in the comments and we will absolutely get it. But with that, Jason, I want to jump in. You're the realtor in the bunch tonight. If you have someone show up and they say, hey, I'm a veteran, I'm VA eligible, want to buy a house, don't know what that means. Where do I start the process? What does that conversation look like?
Normally, my very first question is, are you pre-approved? Are you working with a mortgage professional? And then, depending on what they respond, if it's a no, and then I'm like, all right, well, your next step is to reach out to a mortgage professional and let them get a hold of your finances and kind of start to determine what can you financially qualify for to purchase here in San Diego or wherever you're purchasing. And then at that same kind of time frame, I'm going to reach out to the mortgage professional, depending on who they're reaching out to, kind of get in contact with them and start to build a rapport with that mortgage professional as well. And so we're kind of working together, and I'm going to be pinging on that mortgage professional, like, have they uploaded documents? Where are they at? And put a little pressure on that potential buyer, saying, did you get the documents to Randy or Tina or yourself? Make sure you get them to them, and that way they can start the process, because the sooner you get your financial documents to them, they can get that pre-approval, and then we can kind of start our journey as far as determining what you're looking to purchase here, and what that looks like. Eventually, let's just say a week later, we're going to set up a buyer's consultation. That's what I call them anyway, where I'm going to sit down and we're going to go through their needs, wants, and desires, as well as their goals. I like to always throw goals in there, mainly because military members, especially active duty, really are thinking like tomorrow, and not necessarily thinking 3 years, 5 years. And the reason I want to bring in the goals is because, hey, if they're only here for a short PCS 3-year period, then we need to plan to purchase something that's only, they're only going to live in for 3 years. It's not a forever home. And so what is it going to look like if they need to sell or potentially rent, so that they have options? Because a lot of members kind of think about, today I need these needs to service my family. And all of a sudden they get orders and they PCS to Hawaii. And then they're like, oh, I have this house, I need to short sell, or I need to get out of this house. I can't afford this payment and I'm leaving the area. What can I do? And that was kind of a short-sighted conversation back when they first bought. So it's that pre-planning, kind of holistic conversation, as well as, their needs and wants, and to make sure it all fits in that budget of that pre-approval.
So one of the big questions that we on the mortgage side get is, it's not as big as it used to be. Because remember 25 years ago, before everyone was big on the internet, realtors really controlled that relationship. People would reach out to a realtor would say, have you been pre-approved, and make an introduction to a lender. So one of the ones we get all the time is, why are these realtors always pushing me to a lender? Are they getting kickbacks? Do they make money? They do not. That is actually illegal. Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act makes that illegal. You cannot pay for a lead, anything of that sort. So it really is as simple as they want to know what you actually qualify for. And then, as Jason said, match that up to what you want, your goals, dreams, desires on that. So Tina, let's say Jason refers someone over to you and you make that initial first call. Where are we starting? What does that process look like? Jason mentioned gathering the documentation, but what does your process look like for someone just starting the pre-approval into a home search?
So kind of like Jason, I do an analysis for the borrower or with the borrower. And pardon me, we look at a loan application. For me, I start with the conversation because not everyone is necessarily ready for a loan application. And when people feel like that's the first step, is like we're already going all the way to a loan app, I think it's short-sighted. So I like to start with a quick little 15-minute conversation about, hey, what are you looking to do? Things like that, and determine if it's appropriate to fill out a loan application. Then if that is the case, then we go forward. And some reasons why that might not be the case is if they're like, hey, we're on base housing and it's getting squeezy for some reason, but it's affordable and we're looking to leave in 2 years. I might say like, are we sure we want to buy? Right? Like that might be a good idea, but let's talk about those reasons and let's see on paper that that really works out. If that's your intention to buy and then use it as a rental later, then that's going to be one strategy. And then I would be like, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. But I'm going to upfront at least have the conversation about what they're looking to do, how long they're looking to do it, if it makes sense. Then when we move on to a loan application, we're going to do a loan application based off of income, assets, credit, the property we're going to buy, all of those kinds of good things. And we're also going to talk about insurance. And then we're going to layer on top of that, what are you going to do with it once you are done with this first phase of that house?
Randy, does that mesh up pretty well with what your front end conversation is when someone is introduced to you?
Absolutely. My biggest thing is the old fashioned 3 C's, where that we basically look for the 30,000 foot view as far as where does your income come from, what's your credit look like, anything that I need to know about your situation, what are your goals, and then educate them through the process on the different things that they may not know about, like how much cash do you have you ever heard of seller concessions? Are you familiar with them? Have you done this before? So just get to really know people. And I'm like Tina and I'd really like for our first contact to be a discussion where that we cover all these things and I really understand their situation and see if there's anything that might high center them from the beginning that we might be able to attack and if they have an issue, put it in the forefront. Put a plan together.
We actually have our first question of the night, and it's a good one. It kind of fits in here, and I feel a little embarrassed that I didn't add this to our list of 10, but I was thinking more VA related, and this isn't necessarily VA specific. I actually did a video on my channel on this week because one of the biggest questions that I get, and I know you guys are getting it too, can a lender give an idea of monthly payments without running my credit? So Randy, what can you do for that client in terms of giving them an idea? I always like to say that not necessarily that first call, but when we're done with the pre-approval, you have that initial discovery call, then we gather some documentation. Then at that point, I owe you some things. I owe you, what's your max qualification? What does that monthly payment look like? How much money do you need? But an element of that that's really important is knowing what the credit score is and having an accurate depiction of the monthly debts and how they show up on the credit report. So, Randy, can you give someone an idea of their monthly payments without running the credit? How do you handle that? And Tina, I want you to answer it also, because it's important. People are nervous. They've heard terrible things about inquiries on their credit, having too many people pull it. From our end, we get charged $1 million for credit reports now, so we don't want to pull them. And that's something that's hard for borrowers to understand, that we don't want to pull it any more than they want it pulled. But what is the purpose of that credit report? What can you do, and what's appropriate at which stages when we're early in this process?
Well, one of my biggest things is I do a lot of what I call second looks. And where I don't make people jump through all the hoops, et cetera, as long as we got a discussion going, and if their primary concern is whether or not they, can give me whether I can give them an idea of what a payment would look like, et cetera, then I'm fine with that. But you have to understand that it's all what I call spitball, because I don't know your FICO score. I'm going to take your word for what it is, but that doesn't mean that it's going to apply when I actually pull credit, et cetera. So I can definitely give you an idea based on what we presume to be a credit score, what we presume to be a home insurance premium, what we presume to be property taxes, and all those things are really, really variable based on the property, based on the FICO, et cetera, et cetera. So I can get you in the ballpark, but I got to do the application to get you into something that's actually real. So if you're scared away by, what you think your FICO score is, et cetera, one of the biggest things that I see all the time is that people don't really know their FICO score. It is so many times terribly wrong. And oftentimes because they're using some different consumer score, et cetera. And oftentimes because they remember what it was, 6 years ago when they did something, et cetera, and it's changed this month. But if you are willing to understand that this is just a spitball, then yeah, I can jump off and we can have a discussion, but it's just not going to be binding until we get an actual credit bureau. And even then, one of the things that I try to do with people is get like a spitball fee sheet, et cetera, and show them kind of what the payment's going to look like. But if I don't have a property, if I don't have an actual homeowner's insurance quote, then insurance is one of the big things that's varying right now in a huge way. And in Texas, the difference between a property tax on one side of the street and the other could be, $600 a month. It is just a good jumping off, and that's it for me.
Tina, how about for you? Is that pretty similar how you approach that concept of when we need the credit report to get firm numbers for someone?
No, you know what? Actually, I probably would differ a little bit from Randy on that. And actually, can you put the question back up?
Sure.
This is what I would say, how I would approach it. If you read this question, it says, can a lender give an idea of monthly payments without running credit? Yes, I can do that. If you change the two letters of AN to my credit, my payment somewhere in there, and if I hear you say my payment, I will not answer that question, because I believe it plants a seed of expectation. And the seed of expectation is based off of me pulling it out of the sky. And I don't like to do that. So and I actually have an older gentleman right now that I'm working with, and he is very on and off, and he's asking me these questions, right? Like, what would my payment be? I'm really trying to get to, why are you asking this? Because I already sent you the link to the loan app. You're not doing that. We're not pulling credit. Like, we're not even there yet. And you're asking very specific information that I'm actually not willing to give, because a little bit of it is a give and take. If he was willing to even put his social security number or something in, I might be more willing to, but I think it just required us to get to the conversation. He wanted to do some mental math of, if I can rent my house for $6,000, how much would the payment on this new property be? Would it be about $6,000? right? I can answer that question, but that's not answering a qualifying question. So that's the payment, but I have no idea whether you can qualify for that payment or not. And that's a whole separate discussion. And when someone's asking for a rate specific payment question, they're putting the cart before the horse. And I've tried to get to like, why are you not following the process? Because the process actually works like this so that you have information with certainty that you can make decisions upon. That's like my motto. And so when I'm forced to do that, it's usually because someone's uncomfortable about something and I need to be doing some more probing as to why they're wanting. Like when Randy was saying we start with 30,000 foot view information, totally the same page with Randy. To me, this is somebody asking you to give them 80,000 foot view information. And you're like, why would you even want that?
Well, you said something really important there, is that you have a process. And if early in the going, you have someone that doesn't want to go with that process, it doesn't make them a bad person. But it means for me that I'm probably going to say, hey, you know what? I don't think that I'm the lender for you. You want to drive the bus. You want to go a certain direction. I've done this for 29 years. Doesn't mean I'm all knowing. It doesn't mean my way is the only way, but it means in 29 years of doing this, tens of thousands of loans, we have figured out what works and what doesn't work to get you from the start line to the finish line with no stress, no headaches, no surprises, no shocks. And this is what it takes to do that. So we can work around the credit report if you're very early in the process and you're super worried. If, like Randy said, you're calling for a second opinion, I don't want to pull your credit if you just want a number. If you tell me that Randy pulled it and it's an 802 credit score, cool. If it's 802 and if you qualify, here's what your terms look like. So absolutely possible. But I would just be cautious. Pick a pro and go with their system, whether it's someone like Jason on the real estate side or your mortgage professional. If they've been doing this a period of time, they should have a defined way of doing business that's not built around their personal preferences, but that is built around getting optimal outcomes for the buyer or borrower. So
and
with that,
just as a general rule of thumb, I prefer to do a hard credit pull very early in the process because of what Randy said. It allows me to know with certainty what I'm going to have to deal with. And if there's anything that we can do to benefit you in terms of pricing or optimize a FICO score, that's part of the loan process that I provide. It's not part of a mortgage loan, but it's part of a mortgage strategy when you're a fiduciary and you're looking for the lowest cost of borrowing. But I'm also looking to help out my pal Jason over here so that my borrower has the most amount of buying power, because I want them to have a little bit extra if Jason has to negotiate or something. So when I'm looking to do those things, I'm looking to kind of optimize cost and reach of the borrower at the same time. So pulling certainty in the front end by doing a hard credit pull allows us to do that.
Perfect. Part of the problem of having too much expertise in one room is we have 10 on our list and we've got 19 minutes in and we've only cleared through one. So we're gonna have to try and be as succinct as we can with our knowledge. We had 8 more to get through here, because I just realized that with sub questions here, I actually misnumbered and we got 9 with 2 sub questions. So it basically comes out to 10, but you know where we're going. Jason, I think you are uniquely positioned to answer this one, being in a high-priced and getting higher-priced market in San Diego. What are the VA loan limits for 2024? We're going on, 4 years now of this new system, and it is still a frequent question that we get in California. What's the most I can borrow VA with 0 down?
Whatever you're financially approved for. There is no cap on the VA itself, at least not with your first your number one loan, not until we get into bonus entitlement, which then the conforming loan limits come into play.
So with that, we had that change. What was it, 2020, the Blue Water Navy Act,
Right.
and they needed, the VA had to pay for some other things. So they said, hey, if we take the top off this, we're going to generate some additional fees. We'll be able to pay for some other stuff. So if you have full entitlement, no matter where you are, you're good. You can borrow as much as a lender will allow. With that, I think the highest I've heard is about 4 million lenders willing to go up to a zero down. Randy, is that, Tina, is that what you've kind of seen as the max out there? VA doesn't cap it, but the lenders go, hey, we're not going to let you buy a house without putting any money down, no matter how much you may want to do. So Jason, you hinted at the second piece to that, where there can be limits. I've got a veteran here in Southern California right now. He's wanting to buy a $1.2 million house, and we would say, well, cool, zero down, no problem. Well, he owns his home currently with a VA loan on it, and he doesn't want to sell it. So how does that play out, or what is that person limited to?
Well, you have
you don't have to go into the full calculation, because that's a whole video in and of itself.
Yeah, you have two options, right? That buyer can either could refinance their home and do a one-time restoration. So refinance the home into a conventional loan or another loan product out of the VA, and then do a one-time restoration, which then would essentially somewhat look like a brand new VA loan, with some caveats to it. Or you calculate the bonus entitlement, which involves taking their currently used entitlement, doing a quick division on the conforming loan limit. So like here in San Diego, it's $1,006,250. Divide that by 4, subtract their entitlement from that, and that'll give them the remaining entitlement. Then you multiply it again by 4, and that'll give them the purchase price that they can put down with zero down. At that zero down, anything above that amount is 25%, or I like to say a quarter on the dollar over. And then that's the math down and dirty. I don't want to get too into the details, but yeah.
This is where it is important that you are working with a vetted pro. Jason's a realtor and knows the calculation. Very few realtors know it. Very few lenders know it. So part of why Christopher Griffith built this community was to make sure that people running around telling you they can do VA loans knows these guidelines like the back of their hand. For my guy here, almost all of his entitlement was used up. He wanted to put a down payment. So I think we're at $204,000 he needed to put down to make that happen. But the number is going to vary. It's going to vary by what your original purchase looked like. It's going to vary about what the county limits are, a number of things, as Jason said. So make sure you get with a pro on that one. Randy, I want to ask you one of my personal least favorite questions that comes up all of the time in the vetted VA group is, how do I roll my closing costs into my VA purchase? I got no money. I don't have to put down. I want to roll my closing costs in. I want to come in with no money out of pocket. How do I do it?
Well, that's a part of the conversation where that we learn about seller concessions. This is basically the thing that people have to understand, is that you can't roll your closing cost in. You can't just say, I want to roll my closing cost into my loan. It can't happen. What you can do is negotiate, or have your realtor negotiate the process so that the seller covers the closing costs and escrow, build out, etc. And that happens all the time, I think, with people not realizing it, because so many times people are going to say, my last loan that I did, I rolled them all in. And I will say, well, someone in your party negotiated that for you on your behalf. No, they didn't. Yes, they did. So that's just the bottom line is the VA is very, very beautiful loan product in that they will allow unlimited seller concessions to be utilized, certainly enough to cover everything that you want to do, including a couple of points discount, et cetera, but it has to be negotiated up front, and it's covered by the seller. So we can go through examples if you want, but since we're short, that's the bottom line.
No, it's a perfect answer. And really, for whatever reason, the folks that insist they've done it are adamant that they have done it, despite the fact that we all know you could not possibly have done that. Yeah. Tina, another one that comes up a ton here. Veteran says, hey, I think I want to use my VA benefit, but aren't VA appraisals much more stringent, difficult, troublesome than a conventional, than an FHA, than another type of loan product? Is that true? And what does that look like in the real world?
I would say that it is not necessarily any more difficult than an FHA, certainly, but it is a little bit more stringent than a conventional loan in that there are minimum property standards that need to be met and that the VA is looking out for the veteran. But I always tell my clients, I wouldn't fear that. You want to know, if you're buying something like this, what's wrong with the house. And if there is something identified by the appraiser or the inspection as we go through, like in California, we have a lot of termite and pest stuff. You actually want that stuff fixed before you buy your house. So I kind of counsel them about the things that we might find based on what we know about the house. We can anticipate a lot of that. And then any of that that does need to be done in terms of required work can be negotiated in terms of who does it, who pays for it, how it's completed. So I would say I wouldn't fear that, because the seller likely knows that that information, that stuff does need to be fixed. So even though that might be a little more stringent in some people's minds, it's not stringent necessarily in some bad way that should preclude people from accepting a VA loan necessarily, or should have a veteran choose a conventional loan because they think that their appraisal is going to be much more difficult. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say that it's like 1 or 2 points more difficult, not 50% more difficult or some significant amount.
Well, what I always tell people is the VA guidelines are more explicit in that they detail the minimum property requirements, which we don't necessarily have for other loan programs. But in the real world of us doing transactions all day, every day, I don't fear a VA appraisal any more than an FHA or a conventional. I had a conventional come back in today and I looked at it, I'm like, is this an FHA appraisal? What you got 9 conditions on here? I looked at the house. The house was in pretty bad shape, but it happens with all loan programs, because if you have health and safety stuff, it's going to get called out. It's not that VA is going, hey, how do we pick this thing apart?
That's right.
How about the second portion of that? So we kind of talked about the minimum property requirements and condition of the property.
Mm-hmm.
People worry that, oh, it's a VA assigned appraiser, they're going to come in with a low value. Maybe a quick walkthrough of what a low value looks like with a VA appraisal, which I'm biased, I think is 1,000 times better than any other loan program.
10,000%. So first of all, you get notified ahead of time before it even comes in low. So right there, it gives you time to work on comps that you and the 2 agents can put together so that you can make sure that you have value. And again, I think that these are great things that are protections that I wish every borrower that bought a home had these same protections, because it's such a flexible program where if Tidewater is going to be issued, they notify you ahead of time. You've got time to work with them on that. They are reasonable. And I think that if you can show the value, if the comparables are there, it's a very data-driven process. It's not an opinion-based process. If your data supports it, I think that it typically goes through. If you don't end up with that, you can do the ROV process and go through that a little bit later down the road. But again, I think that a VA appraisal is really beneficial to the veteran. It's not something to fear. And as a lender, or as a real estate agent, I should know ahead of time if my appraisal is going to come in short. This should not be some surprise. So that's the bigger point too, is that when somebody may not be working with a really knowledgeable veteran or loan officer and agent, that's when those surprises come in. But usually you're having a conversation up front of, hey, I know our offer might be blank, right? So you typically know what to expect ahead of time if you're working with a good agent lender partner.
Well,
and one of the things that I'd just like to point out on this process is that human nature plays a big part in appraisals when it comes to anything. If you're in a discussion about anything, but I'm talking about value in this case, the difference between the other appraisers and the VA appraisers is the VA appraisal if he's coming to a conclusion that's different, he doesn't go and stake his value on a hill and fight that battle, because once he's staked his flag, he at that value, he's going to argue, he or she's going to argue with it, etc. And you've got to change their mind. It's a different thing when they say, okay, I'm not seeing this. It's just like I've been married for 35 years. And if I have a discussion with my wife about something and say, you're wrong, then, and make her try to tell me where I'm wrong. Usually I'm wrong, but but you know, it's a different discussion than saying, hey, I'm not seeing what you're seeing, explain it to me. And that's the big thing about the VA appraisal process is human nature. Not only do we get that with the appraiser themselves, but the second step, the ROV, takes the guy or girl that's already disagreed with you out of the process and has a new person that you're able to talk to about it. So it's a human nature thing that's done right.
Agreed.
So we actually have one of our vetted pros here with a very good question. Claudia was with us last week, and she would like to know from the four of us, what's the highest amount you were able to get back on a low appraisal? So appraisal comes in low. What was the most you were able, either through Tidewater? Well, through Tidewater, we wouldn't know what the value was and bring it, but through the ROV process, Randy, what's the most you've ever got added to an appraisal?
45,000 for me.
Which is a big number. What was the purchase price on that one?
It was 5 something.
So about 10, close to 10% on the value.
10%. It was almost exactly 10%.
How about you, Tina?
I've never had to go to ROV. I've had Tidewater issued once, and we provided comps, and he came up to our comps, and we closed.
Which speaks to how well the process works. It is an awesome process. And if every loan program adopted it, I think we would all be in favor of that. Jason, have you had an ROV where you've been able to get a boost to an appraisal?
We've done probably a half a dozen ROVs, actually, especially during the COVID timeframe. I think the highest we got back was like around 62,000. We've never lost an ROV, though. Every one of them we've been successful on that we've submitted.
Which speaks to the fact that if it's data driven and supported with logic from the veteran as to why they are okay with that value, it's likely to go through unless it's just absolute craziness.
Yeah, we've talked about this, I think, on other lives, but from a real estate standpoint or a real estate agent standpoint, when we make an offer, we already know we've already pulled comps. Like I never tell like a buyer just throw out an offer. Like we have a data-driven conversation before at the very beginning. So if they're shooting for the stars, maybe they have cash in hand and they're like, I don't care if I'm going to pay over type deal. We already know that we're going into this, starting this contract where we think, hey, we might be getting an ROV or having a Tidewater because we're going to have an appraisal issue. We know that on day one. This is never like, I don't want to ever be like, hey, yeah, just throw whatever offer you want out there so that, 14 days in, the appraiser's coming back going, all right. And then you're like, well, I don't have any data. No, I already have the data sitting here. It's been sitting here since day one. It makes the whole process, the ROV, the Tidewater, a lot quicker. Just to be like, yeah, here's the comps. Here's why we put the offer in at this amount, X, Y, Z, and go forward.
And one of the things that I'd like to volunteer on that too is just, for me, a very high percentage of my issues are resolved at the Tidewater stage. Mm-hmm. Very, very few do go to the ROV stage because oftentimes it's like Jason said, you go to the listing agent and say, and this was primarily during COVID when people were being stupid on some of the offers that they were making, and the listing agent would say, okay, yeah, we knew it wasn't going to appraise for 100,000 over offer list price. And so they didn't go to the next step because it wasn't a realistic value to begin with. And probably 80% of my stuff is resolved at that stage and only about 20% go to the next stage. And I've never had an issue to speak of where the ROV didn't resolve the conflict one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily get the value, but even fewer of those got that. In fact, I even had one ROV that the RLC didn't give me the value, but they gave me the guarantee. And I thought that was really, really interesting that it was like a $15,000 difference, and they said we're not gonna say that you got the valuation, but we're gonna guarantee the 25% based on what you have. And so it's a very, very effective process.
And not to brag here, guys, but I did have a $74,000 one, but it was about the same percentage as Randy's. I mean, I don't know that you're really ever going to have an appraisal come in much more than 10% short. It was a $780,000, and they brought it in crazy low. We knew it was a stretch. To Jason's point, the agents were prepared. They're like, we know it's a stretch. We got to have all of our data lined up. And the appraiser said, no, pound sand. And on the ROV, the RLC looked through it and said, yeah, we're cool with your number. Jason, on the real estate side, we have this come up a lot. People want to know, can I use my VA loan to buy a foreclosure, to buy a short sale? And slightly different here, it kind of relates back to the appraisal. Can I buy a fixer-upper? But is there anything unique about short sales or foreclosures or any specific type of seller that would preclude you from using your VA financing?
I mean, technically, no. There's nothing that can. Short sales, we've done short sales here in San Diego. It's nothing really different other than you have a short sale negotiator, or you're working with a servicer per se. So you submit your offer. The seller may say, yeah, that looks good, but then we have to get the actual final approval from either the short sale negotiator or like the servicer to say, yeah, that's going to work. It takes a little bit of time. It's kind of timelines are almost on par with like an assumable. You're looking like 60 days out type deal, maybe even longer. I think this short sale has better communication than the assumable side, but the foreclosure is kind of a unique animal in the sense that, at least in my area, because I'm sure foreclosures differ a little bit throughout the U.S., just like real estate in general does. But here in Southern California, our foreclosures tend to go to auction first, and when they're at auction, very few auctions will allow a loan product. Normally it's a kind of a cash only. Now there are some that do allow a loan, but from my experience, they normally require a down payment. So even if you were to go to the auction, find the foreclosure, put a bid on it, win the bid, they still want an initial lump sum before that VA loan can kind of go into play. I've never actually gone through one with a VA loan. I have seen where some foreclosures make it to market. Most of the ones that don't get picked up through a auction end up needing a lot of work, where like MPRs would come into play, or you're looking at some sort of reno. You might be able to get in with like a VA reno loan. But we have a very high investor market here. So you're competing, like that VA loan buyer is competing with a lot of cash investors that are turning these homes. So it's not impossible, but the possibility exists, but it's probably not likely going to pan out the way that you might think it might on the foreclosure side anyway.
I think the important thing to remember is I don't think most buyers really understand what a short sale is. On a short sale, if I'm offering $500,000 on the house and the seller owes $300,000, escrow is going to order a payoff demand, and the bank is going to say, here you go, get us our $300,000 and we're cool. Well, on a short sale, you owe $600,000 and you're offering $500,000. And that whole negotiation process that Jason is talking about is to get a payoff demand from the bank that says, I'm cool taking $500,000 or whatever the net of fees of that is. So you have to negotiate to get that payoff demand that says, yeah, we'll let the seller sell you the house and take this as payment in full. The foreclosure can be two different things. As Jason said, if you're trying to buy a home as it is foreclosed at the trustee's sale, at the courthouse steps, generally a different animal. You need to be there at the auction with literally cashier's check in hand, ready to pay for it. But once it goes and is owned by the bank is just the seller. And really it comes back down to exactly as Jason said, the condition of that property. Does it meet the MPRs? And we did an episode about 6 months ago. It's probably the most watched episode we've ever done of the live on VA renovation loans. So it's similar to a 203K where you can get those. Even if we don't meet the MPR, you do have an option. It's more complicated, a little bit more expensive. So go back and watch that episode, because again, it is the #1 most watched episode we've ever done. I forget, it was a loan officer and a realtor in Texas that vetted pros that walked us through a transaction they had just done, and it worked out really well and went step by step. But it gets probably 10 views for every other episode of the show. So with that, what do we have here? We have, Randy, you've answered this one before for us, and I like your answer. So should a veteran ever not use their VA financing? Is there a time and a place for a veteran to not use their VA loan benefit?
I think the question for me is that if that veteran has a 10% rating, then there's very seldom going to be, except in bonus entitlement situations, a situation where the VA loan is not better. The VA loan should be priced better. In my case, it's usually the 3/4 of a point or so better in rate. And so the question is, if you've got to put a down payment anyway, your rate's going to be higher. How's it commensurate? Because obviously you're putting a 25% of the delta down between what you have, and so that's going to be the basic thing. Is people that have a bonus entitlement situation where that they just don't have enough entitlement, kind of like the scenario that Jason was covering earlier. Those people may be better off, but they're going to pay more in the basic rate when it comes right down to it. So 19 times out of 20, I say you're going to be better off with a VA loan, especially if you don't have a funding fee that you've got to play with.
So close the loop for us. What does that 20th situation look like where the veteran would go, that's an expensive loan, I should go another direction?
Yeah, so if it's a subsequent, if you don't have a 10% rating, and so you got a subsequent situation and you're in a bonus entitlement situation where you're going to have to bring cash to the table anyway, that would be enough to get you out of PMI. 20% down is going to be required on a conventional loan. That would probably be the only time ever. And what happens more often than not, people are not talked out of VA loans and into conventionals. They're talked out of VA loans and into FHA products because of people on their loan officer side that don't have or know or understand the product. So it's all going to be boiled down to the actual numbers, and any good loan officer can run those for you, give you other options like refinancing, the one-time restoration, etc. Still may end up being the VA loan may end up better, but that 20th time it's because of that.
So Randy talked earlier about doing a lot of second opinions. If you find yourself in this situation where someone is telling you you can't or you shouldn't use your VA benefit, definitely reach out and get a second opinion, because most people are talking you out of it for the wrong reasons. And someone that understands the math that Randy just went through real quickly can pencil that out for you so you can quantify and see the differences and confirm 100% for sure that you're in that 3, 4, 5% of the time where there might be a better option for you. Tina, I want you to answer the next question. So I'm going to let Randy go through this real quick. We've got a good question here. We would like to purchase a viewer says, we would like to purchase a model home in another state, but it won't be available until next year. We want to retire around the same time. Is it better to close on the house prior to renting, or can the VA loan look at the income that you would be drawing from in retirement? It's not, we don't have enough information to give a definitive answer, but you have enough. I'm going to take it down so we can see your face, Randy, but you have the gist of it so you can give us an answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you want Randy to answer?
Yeah, I want you to give us the next one.
Okay, so the biggest thing on this that comes into play is the one thing that I think that really suffers is folks that are retiring and have orders of less than 12 months in the military. That becomes really, really tough. It's not that it can't be done, but the question that with this had to do with retiring. And once you retire, when you have 12 months or more left on your orders, you can use your LES income. So it's very cut and dried. It works properly, etc. But when you get out of that 12 months, even to the 11th month, then all of a sudden it gets tricky. And the tricky part is you can't use your LES income anymore. You can certainly still use your spouse's income, and that is are we changing it? Retired military already?
That's what they're saying. They're already retired military.
Okay. Well, I thought the question said retiring early, but so that's a little bit different for me. But that 12 months is the biggest thing, since we're talking about it, or since I'm talking about it, is that's when it becomes really tricky. You can use forecasted retirement income. Obviously, you got your high 3, and you can run through to see where that piece is going to be. But the tricky part is you can't use your medical retirement pay because that's not a formula, that's an individual award, and it's not going to be actually in place and usable until you're actually retired. So that's the biggest piece there. Otherwise, I'd have to look at that question again to see exactly what they're asking.
Another follow-up: retired military already, currently working a civilian job and getting ready to retire. So you read it correctly the first time, but they were already retired from the military, working a civilian job, getting ready to retire from that. Yeah. So like what I would say to this, it sounds like a deceptively simple question, and it is. If you call Randy, you call Tina, you call me, where we can have a little back and forth, that's an easy one to answer. A little bit difficult in the text format here, but just depending on the type of retirement and all of the issues that Randy ran through, it's likely you could go either route, but you want to make sure 100%. So reach out to a vetted pro that is approved in your area. They'll be happy to walk through this with you.
There's a lot of moving parts in there too, because it depends on when you're going to close. And if you're going to buy a model home, but then not close for a long time, that's actually a pretty complex question to answer that way without some more details.
Deceptively simple on the surface, but a lot of details in there. So Tina,
so it kind of gets into, if I'm reading it right now, and obviously I'm not looking at it, but it may get into an occupation. This question is about when are you going to take occupancy on a VA loan, because that's kind of what it sounds like. It may be in a different state than where you're at, etc. So that's going to be a question. Can some member of the family take occupancy for you, because that's going to be a hurdle that you're going to have to address right up front if it's in a different state.
That's a good catch. I wasn't even thinking about the other state. See, Randy's a detail guy. That's why we have him here, so we don't miss little details in the question. So Tina, this is what I wanted to say for you. This is a big one everywhere in the country, but really big here in California, Southern California, the Bay Area, San Diego. Can I use a VA loan to either buy a home with an ADU, or sort of a little trickier question, can I use it to build an ADU?
Okay, so I can answer the first part, but I'm going to ask you and Randy the second part, because I'm curious too. So can you buy a home that has an ADU existing? Absolutely. And if that ADU is conforming to the codes that it was built with, all of that, you can use 75% of the anticipated rents received in order to qualify. So that absolutely can do. The second question I'm curious about, because that's a big question coming up in my area and lots of areas, which is, can I use a VA loan to build an ADU? Meaning, can I do a refi and build an ADU? You could do a cash out refi, yes. But in terms of, could I do a construction loan to build an ADU, a VA construction loan? I don't know that question. So that to me right now has been a little bit of a financing challenge, because I think that people that want to ponder this as a consideration start with like, okay, well, could I kind of afford the financing? And then I've been pushing back going, okay, well, how much is it going to cost? Have you gotten like plans and figured out how much you're going to need to borrow? And they're like, well, I can't really do that until you do this. So it's been an interesting, I'm watching my sister go through it right now, and it's a learn along as you go. And each individual is passed a little different. And I wish there was like a buyer's guide, or like here's the ABC steps on how to analyze your situation, because I think it's missing out there.
Well, the crazy thing is, if we hadn't gone through the world's greatest refinance market, where most veterans who've owned a home long enough to build up a significant amount of equity have one of those really low interest rates, now you go, well, cool. VA will let you do 100% cash out refinance. So we don't even have to tell them we're building an ADU. Do your 100% cash out, use the money to do whatever you want, including build your ADU. But they go, well, I don't want to give up a 3% interest rate or a 2 or a 1.875 like some of our clients have, and go out and take a 6.5, 6.75, 7% interest rate. So that's the tough part about it. VA gives you a lot of flexibility, and they've been pretty open to this. These guidelines are not, fully set in stone of what they will and won't do with the ADU, but they've been pretty open and flexible about it. So for us, we can always reach out to the RLC and ask them the question and get their insights on it. So we are down to our last question here. Jason, I'll let you weigh in on this. People don't necessarily ask the question, how much is my VA funding fee? What is the VA funding fee? But it almost comes up as an objection. Well, I'd like to use my VA, but I have this funding fee. You want to walk through what it looks like for most of our buyers. More than 80% are doing zero down. Many, as Randy pointed out earlier, are exempt from the funding fee through a disability rating. But how does that conversation go when you're talking to veteran buyers and preparing them for the funding fee and explaining what it is and how it works?
I'm trying to think of how many people I ask about it. But funding fee is a one-time. I kind of call it just a one-time PMI payment. It's there to essentially help fund the VA, keep it going, right? Keep the entire organization for the VA loan going. But I look at it as a one-time PMI payment. For first-time use, you're looking at 2.15%. That can be paid out of pocket, or it can be actually rolled into the loan. Subsequent use, you're looking at 3.3%. And then if you have savings and looking to put something down, 5% is always a good amount, because that'll drop that down for either side down to 1.5%. Unless, of course, you're disabled, which, as you already mentioned, it's waived. And then you can put down 10%, which drops it down to 1.25%. But like the delta, if you just put money
Minimal
down,
benefit.
right? Like if you're just wanting to put money down, or maybe your bonus entitlement situation where you need to put money down, and you're already putting 10% down, and you're not disabled, then you do save a little bit more on that funding fee. But if you're just trying to cut the funding fee down, it doesn't seem really worth it to put 10%. Like the 5% is really the cherry.
And where I will say, like, the only time I ever really get that question is subsequent use. Someone doesn't have a disability rating, and they're like, I can't really put 5% down, but that giant funding fee is out there. Tina, is that similar for you? That's really when we have that conversation?
Yeah, and you can kind of see it like as a loan officer, but certainly it's worth calculating. If I would pull a calculation against a comparison to a conventional loan, if, like we said, if it was subsequent use, if it's in a high dollar market, if that funding fee ends up being a lot, you should do it. Or if they have proceeds from the sale of a previous property, it might not be worth it sometimes, but rarely.
And one of the things, I have a little story to tell about it. I have a buddy that I do American Legion programs with, and his big thing was we were doing a loan together, and he had done a previous loan without me somewhere else, a VA loan, and at the documentation, he said, "What the heck is this $16,000?" And I said, "It's a funding fee for subsequent use." And he said, I didn't have to pay that last time. I said, "You paid something last time." And he said, "No, I didn't. It was, it really alarmed him." And so the positive of all this was I said, all you have to do is get your 10%. And I know this guy, he's a Marine, and he's got all sorts of things wrong with him at this point in time. I said, 10% is not going to be a problem for you. You go get this thing started. And so he did, and actually he's just hit 100%. Now, it's been 5 years now because he's been through a lot of process, but we help people get started in the medical ratings. And so one of the biggest things for people is always ask about the medical ratings, and then ask them if they've ever took the time to just to get started. And so many people just never take that whatsoever. Our last thing that we did, the American Legion meeting, we had 5 Vietnam era veterans that were there, and none of them ever started the ratings process.
Wow.
And so it was just a shame, because this in the summer last July, we had a guy that had never had his. He was also Vietnam era, and he came to this meeting as well. And obviously there's 8 months, 9 months delta, and he's at 80% rating now, and he'd never had his rating before. So we got him started. But that's just a little bit of a thing. Is 10% is not that big of a deal, and tinnitus is something that most people can work on. And I think as a not as a veteran, but as a veteran, person that deals with veterans every day, we should at least point that out to them, that it's not difficult. So many people just don't start the process. It's just something they're putting off to a different day, etc. But when you see that $16,000 fee, that's just my buddies. It was like, it wasn't that much trouble. You should have done it.
So Randy, what I want to say is walk us through that timeline of how important it is to when you've started that process. I mean, does it have to be fully complete and have the rating before the loan closes? Does it have to be in process? What is important about that timeline?
Yeah. So it has to be in process, and then your loan officer has to understand the 2687 that has to be done in advance to show, and it's really on the loan officer to walk you through that. But I would tell you that if it's a timing issue for you, the biggest thing I would teach you or share with you is don't go for all 80% of the issues that you have in that same time frame, because that's just going to muddy the waters. Go for something that's easy and do it, get that 10%, and then you can fight the other for as long as you want to fight to get as much as you want to get. But the 10% is what we're trying to capture here. Don't lose sight of that. Make sure that you're going the path of least resistance for the 10%.
Perfect. So we got through our entire list, and we have 3 minutes to spare. And as you guys know, I always like to give everyone a chance to put their final 2 cents in. So Jason, you're stuck here. You got to go first, and you get to go first in final words. Any questions we didn't cover? Anything people in your market, veterans in your market, or nationwide should be considering or thinking of right now?
Not off the top of the head. I would just add to what Randy just said was, as a veteran, I got out, submitted my medical stuff, and I was actually 0% rated. And my wife, said, you're messed up. You should go back. And
that's not nice.
Yeah.
Who knows you better though, right?
Yeah. So she's been with me for 22 years, so she definitely knows I'm messed up. But anyway, I was like, no, kind of kick that can down the road, essentially just like, Randy's talking about. And I finally did decide to go back, and just kind of was like, fine, I'll go back, let me appease you. And then I was rated 40%. And all I can say is, in retrospect, I went essentially a whole decade at 0%. And it's like, shame on me for not putting forth the effort, and then, telling everyone else that, hey, you really should do this, like put in the effort. Military life in general is not the nicest on our bodies. And so that's all. It's my only 2 cents for today.
Tina?
My 2 cents is on that same vein. I tell my guys, especially the ones that are still active duty, like I plant the seed then, hey, you're going to pay the funding fee now, right? Because you're still active duty. There's no disability rating, whatever. But when you are discharged, that's part of your okay, you're all burned out. You're separating from the military. You just want to put it behind you. You don't want to have to work on anything else. I'm like, you know what, buddy? make certain. My dad was a Vietnam vet. It's the whole reason why I do my dedication to Vetted VA is because my dad had Agent Orange. He did not do his disability rating. He did not do all of those things. He did not end up owning a house, even though he wanted to, and had all of this entitlement that went unused, and he didn't know any better. Right. And so it's why I serve. It's why I tell people all of this stuff. And it's why I love being on a platoon every 9 days, because it reminds me to be like, hey, I may not have a VA loan going right now, but it reminds me to talk about it and to educate people because it's important. And if I run across a question and somebody is still active duty, hey, make sure that you go, I don't know what happened to you. You don't have to make stuff up, but something probably happened to you somewhere along the way. So just make sure that you get all that you deserve because you served.
Perfect. Randy, you get the last words tonight.
Same thing as far as like both Jason and Tina. My dad was in the Navy and he was a machinist mate for two tours in the belly of a ship that was built in the 1930s, and he had 70% asbestos blocked lungs, and he refused to do any sort of medical ratings, etc. And the stubbornness comes through with his children, etc. But I'm stubborn the other way. I really believe that, you know, my dad never got a penny that was coming to him, etc. He never got all the things that he should have done because he was too stubborn. But I think that if it's just laziness on the veterans' part, because they are apathetic to it until they see a $16,000 charge, go get that rating. Do it right now. Do it now. Get it started. So
perfect. So Jason, Tina, Randy, appreciate you guys being here, sharing your expertise. If you guys are watching, these aren't the only 10 questions that are out there. If you have questions, if you're watching this in the Vetted VA Facebook group, obviously, you know, you're already at the place where you can ask and get answers to any questions that you have. If you're watching in the Vetted VA Facebook group and you haven't already subscribed to the Vetted VA YouTube channel, go out there, like and subscribe. There's a bunch of additional content that isn't necessarily the easiest to find inside of the Facebook group. We're here every Tuesday. We'll be back next Tuesday with another set of experts and another topic. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you guys next week.
Giddy up.